Welcome back to the 41st Mill Valley Film Festival. It's great to see you all here. We get to see films before anyone else has seen them. And how wonderful is that? Yeah. The other part of that is that you also may have received an audience award ballot as you came in. And I would encourage you to actually ballot as you leave the theatre. It's really great for us to know how you're responding to the films that we're showing. It's great for filmmakers to know that you're responding to their work. And it'll get you into practice for November the 6th. And I am always so happy when we have a Jason Reitman film at Mill Valley Film Festival. You know, there's something about his work that just sort of hits the cultural pulse at exactly the right moment with a way that I can only say is Reitman-esque. I always deeply appreciate his work. I'm sure that you remember that we've had Up in the Air at Mill Valley. We had Men, Women and Children as our opening night film a couple of years ago. And we have some great guests with us tonight, and I'm thrilled to invite Jason Reitman to join us here on stage. Jason, welcome back. Here you go.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you very much. I have to say that for me, Reitman-esque usually means there's Ghostbusters involved, so I really appreciate that. That's extraordinarily
Own it. No,
kind.
I hope you own it because you should.
It's very kind. It's a thrill to be back here. I only have fond memories of this film festival, and it's very sweet what you said about the movie being timely, although I think for the first time I'm ready for this one not to be timely. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Can I invite a couple guys to join me?
I'd love that. That would be great. Yeah.
This is a unique screenplay in that it was co-written by a political journalist and the man who was the press secretary for Hillary Clinton and Howard Dean. Let me introduce my co-writers, Matt Bai, who wrote the book on Gary Hart. Matt Bai. And Jay Carson.
Matt and Jay, welcome to Mill Valley Film Festival. Thank you. Would you like to give us any word of wisdom before we watch the film?
Oh, God, I have no wisdom. I mean, it's interesting because the trailer that just showed opened with, do you remember the moment you fell in love with a story? And I do remember the moment I fell in love with this story. And as a director, you know, the journey of making a movie is a relationship. It's a marriage, and there is a moment of love at first sight. And that moment for me came through a podcast, actually. I was listening to Radiolab, and they did an episode on Gary Hart that featured, it was basically featured and built around Matt Bai's book, which you should buy. And and look, I'm like anyone alive today. I look around me and I wonder, how the hell did we get here? And in this story, I think Matt was kind of the first to see this. There are all these threads that connect to today. No matter what you believe, no matter what side you stand on, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, you know, no matter where your line is of where public stops and privacy starts, this is a movie that I think reflects the time that we're living in.
I think you're right, and I think with that, maybe we should just invite people to enjoy your work. And then you will be back afterwards for a conversation with Mark Fishkin.
I love that, and we have a very special guest with us. We have one of the members of the original Hart campaign team is with us. And you know, I should point out that while this movie does star the most attractive Australian alive, and this is Hugh Jackman like you've never seen him before. I mean, I think we're used to him as an actor who's just kind of heart beats out of his chest, no matter whether he's P.T. Barnum or Logan. This is a different thing. This is, in this movie, he plays an enigma, and he does that thing that's almost impossible for an actor to do. He plays a character we desperately want to know, and he brings us within an inch of letting us in, and never lets us in. And the main characters, strangely, are the 20 people around him. It is the campaign people. It is the journalist at the Herald, the journalist at the Post. It's his family. There are no, as you like to say, there are no good guys or bad guys in this movie. Just people trying to do their job as the world shifts under their feet. And the one thing I will point out is that the heart story is different than you remember. We remember a photo? You remember a photo? The photo is not in the movie because the photo came out months after he left the race. But we don't remember it that way. So there are things that will be different, and I look forward to talking to you about them. And thank you so much for coming out tonight and enjoying the movie. See you after.
Thank you so much. Have a great screening.
Can we bring
Yes, why don't we bring up
Matt Bai, Jay Carson, co-writers. And from the original campaign team, the press secretary, Kevin Sweeney.
Well, I just feel like I was just in the middle of all the chaos and excitement and sadness, right in the middle. And it was really unique how you filmed this, and you feel like you're right in the center of what's going on in this campaign, and that makes it extremely poignant. But first, I'd like to ask, Matt, who wrote the book, why now?
Sorry, we were trying to work out mic cords over here.
Answer whatever you want.
Thank you all for coming and watching the film. Appreciate it. Why the book is not a one-sentence answer. I met Gary Hart in end of 2002, early 2003, and I interviewed him for a piece for the New York Times Magazine. And I wrote a piece about him, which Kevin probably remembers, and was in which it was a fine piece, but in which I quite honestly repeated some of the misperceptions about the scandal that I think a lot of people still have, and I felt badly about that as I looked back into it, and was kind of haunted. Was kind of haunted in the years that passed. That was a haunting sound. In the years that passed, in the years afterward, about just feeling like I had, yeah, thank you. Just feeling like, oh, that's much better. Yeah. Just feeling like I had missed something essential in the story. As a writer, I think it's, as a journalist, you're sort of haunted by things that are unexplored. And I started to connect it to the campaigns I was covering, to the deterioration of the political process I was sort of witnessing as a reporter, and I got this idea to write the book, which not a lot of people thought made sense at that moment. But I did it. It came out in 2014, and in 2015, after the paperback came out, is when I met Jason, and Jay and Jason and I all started working together.
Ironically, it's at the first Mill Valley Film Festival we showed The Candidate. Yeah, wow. So, the first festival is like the millennium, so it was really 40 years ago that we showed The Candidate. And we are in the shadow of Michael Ritchie's office that was just right over there on Miller Avenue.
Oh, really? Kidding?
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
One of the first times that we met, both Matt and Jay came over to my house, and I said, there's a film I want to watch with you guys. And we put on The Candidate by Michael Ritchie, which is, part of this trilogy on the concept of winning that he made at the very beginning of his career, Downhill Racer, The Candidate, and Smile, and all three are brilliant. And there was something about the tone and the style of that film that I knew was going to be kind of a North Star for us. And as we watched it, I watched as Jay and Matt both started to kind of point out all the accuracies that The Candidate got right that so many other political films do not. The way that it handled the kind of the realness of the moments, and that by putting you actually in the room, you could start to naturally make decisions for yourself about how you felt about the subject. And our writing process became very unusual in that it was not about finding the plot of the film. We knew what the plot was. The plot was already written. So it was, how do we present this? Why are we doing this? And we began to write these conversations, and it really came from their life experiences of, okay, this is going to be a movie about what is relevant, right? Like that's what the movie is asking the audience the entire time. What is important versus what is entertaining? What is relevant? And so technically what we want to do is present a film where you are constantly giving the question, what conversation do you want to listen to? Where do your eyes want to go? Where do your ears want to go? From the opening shot of the film where we're scanning the Democratic National Convention, and you're following all these conversations, and you in real time are already making decisions about what you think is important, all the way down to the final shot of the film where there are two things happening on screen simultaneously, Heart on TV and their marriage. And you're trying to make a decision about what is important, what am I curious about, where do I really want to follow?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There was a conversation we had the other night, I think it was Pavel Pavlovsky, and he was talking about the difference with theater, where when somebody speaks, that's where your eye goes. But in film, not necessarily, and you have taken that to the ultimate stage of where you really have to decide both from your ears and your sight what is important on this,
Right.
and that's the essence of really what happened.
Well, we wanted to make a movie where ears pointed you where to look, and which is kind of the opposite of how film naturally works. Film, is obviously such a visual medium, and we think of directors based on their visual style and how they, where they make your eyes look and the way they make you look. I've worked with my production mixer, Steve Morrow, since Thank You for Smoking. And he's brilliant. He has another film that's out in theaters right now. He did the sound on Star is Born last year. He made La La Land. He's truly extraordinary. And on this film, he made a choice early on to mic everybody. Everybody's mic'd, everybody's up. And he would be, and you have to remember on this film, so when you have two people talk at once in a movie, when two people say something simultaneously, you write their dialogue next to each other, and it's usually an unusual thing. The dialogue goes down the center, people talk like this, and then every once in a while, you'll have two sentences simultaneously. Our scripts looked like this. It was just constant simultaneous. Also, we would write additional pages which were not in the script that were just given to actors on the day. Sometimes we would just give magazine articles to actors from 1987 and say, read this is your dialogue, now just talk about this and interrupt them. And so Steve, our mixer, didn't even know everything that was going to be coming at him, and he was playing his mixing board like a piano, bringing up, the faders up and down, making these conscious decisions of where your eyes would go as you listened.
You remember in a presidential campaign, which is what you're inside of in this, I spent a lot of time on them, you're packing 2 days inside of 1 day. And so there's not a lot of time for, a lot of times what you see in a political movie is someone takes the stage and they give a long soliloquy. That never happens inside a presidential campaign. There are 5,000 things happening at once. And Jason would even remind us, we had the candidate as our North Star, and once Jason showed that to us, we're like, okay, this is going to be fine, because that's what it really feels like. When they're meeting about this parade that's going down the street, they're actually arguing over who got what for lunch, and that's what happens in a campaign. So we get on set, and all of a sudden we have this J.K. Simmons speech where he's talking to the staff about their inspiration and what's in their hand and their chance to meet Bush, and all of a sudden Jason's like, wait, we're breaking the rule you guys set. And so the pizza guy comes in and interrupts, because there just aren't those moments in real life on a campaign where the person gets the stage for 2 or 3 pages.
I imagine for you, is this the first time you've seen it completed, or have you seen
I
it?
saw it in Denver a couple weeks ago with Hart and others.
And please tell us your experience, reaction.
So I saw one film then, and I saw a different film today. So when I saw it in August, it was a Hart movie.
It was the same film. I mean, just not to.
When I saw
The old bait and switch, huh?
When I saw it in August, it was a film for me about Gary Hart, and he's a dear friend. I wanted to see what it looked like, what his portrayal was like. And I'd lived through it. I saw it with a bunch of Hart pals, and so we kind of felt traumatized seeing it one more time. This time, it was about media. It was like, okay, what should media cover? What shouldn't they cover? And it was very different. And today, that conversation felt more important, or it was just the conversation that I saw. And I think that's what you guys did. You gave us choices. Like, I can see a different movie. When I see it a third time, it'll be something different. So that from just as an audience member, I love that, and I thought it was honest because there are 10 plot lines, 50, 100 plot lines that go on during the course of a campaign's narrative arc. And so it wouldn't be true if you told one of them. So you gave us choices, and I think that felt honest.
What I also love about it, Jason, is that you really show the consequences not just for Gary Hart, and obviously Lee Hart, but the press as well, and how that thread has intensified to where we are now.
Well, I mean, and I think you should speak to this more than anyone. I mean, this is, it's a screenplay that was co-written by a working political journalist, and I think that was part of our conversation all the time.
Can you give us the answers?
I mean, that's the.
How do we get out of this mess, Matt?
Right. I'll tell you what I really
And
think.
will you be willing to
know,
take a lie detector test?
The voters are a pretty good lie detector. No, it's we which that's actually a real line, isn't it, from that news comment? The voters are a pretty good lie detector test. It's one of the things we settled on very early and talked a lot about was this wasn't a message movie. This wasn't like, here's what you need to do differently, here's what you need to do differently, or who's who to blame. And so part of that process of writing this movie was me in scenes putting myself in the shoes of a political operative and seeing it differently when trying to write lines from the standpoint of someone who was doing Kevin's job, saying, well, wait a minute, that's not a position I've ever had to look at before, but when you're facing the journalist, it's a different thing. Or Jay writing, journalist lines and having to think about what it was like on the other side of the table from where he was. So, in my industry as a journalist, I've been covering national politics for 20 years. We can, and this is going to shock you, and it's going to be hard for you to internalize this, but we can be very thin-skinned about criticism, and we can feel strongly about the righteousness of our cause, but I think the point of it with the journalists in this film is that we're not immune to reflection, to having to revisit decisions and the consequences those decisions have, any more than political operatives are, any more than politicians, candidates are, any more than you, the voters, and the consumers of news are. That we're asking everybody to reflect on a bunch of decisions that got made in a set of impossible and complex circumstances in a very short collapsed period of time that had reverberations for many, many years. And hopefully, like Kevin says, hopefully every time you see it, and hopefully you will go see it multiple times, you do get a different perspective, and you can see it from another point of view. I sometimes liken it to like these choose your own adventure books I read when I was a kid. You can choose a different page and go down that path and see where, how would that have ended differently? What would that decision have meant had it been the reverse?
We set out to, I can yell, but we set out to make a movie which you rarely see in a political setting about the human beings that do this job. So as Jason said when he was introducing it, there are no good guys or bad guys in this movie. There are no black hats or white hats. We don't have one-dimensional archetypes of this is the person who we're supposed to like and this is the person we're not supposed to like. We never saw that on the campaigns we worked on. There were human beings put in really difficult situations trying to do the best job that they could, and we tried to show that in this movie, from the candidate to the candidate's wife, to the journalist, to the political operatives. They're in this setting for the first time. They haven't faced these decisions before, but they're people. One of them sitting right down there. They're people just trying to do the best job that they could, and we hope that came through in the movie, because it's the story that we were trying to tell, really the human side of it.
Can I just add one thing? The thing that I loved most was the ensemble. So we were all really young. I think I was 28 when the campaign ended. But we had all worked a presidential campaign before. We were experienced. We were ready, and we were really tight. We really got along really well. We were a really close group. We were really good at what we did. And you couldn't ever separate us. I mean, we did everything together. And so what I love is that in this, that ensemble they're competent, they're tight, they have fun together, and it took a lot to break them up. I mean, again, what I appreciate was the friendships I had and how the ensemble here reflected that.
Well, part of the reason you feel that, Kevin, is because on set that was actually happening with the actors, it was much like a campaign, and they're spending all this time together, and the operatives and the journalists, and they're all hanging out together, and I think the same dynamic formed in the movie set, which is why it reflects on screen something close to the reality.
And Hugh Jackman was just an enlightened choice for this, and I don't think we've ever, as you said in the beginning, seen him like that. And Vera Farmiga, and you've worked with her before, just an amazing actress, and of course Oscar-nominated J.K. Simmons.
Winner.
Yeah, it's a winner. But all the ensemble in its totality were incredible, and I always could get into the danger level when I make comparisons or with filmmakers with other filmmakers, but it reminds me of the best of Robert Altman as well.
That's
So
very kind. I mean, it's enormous praise, and I think you're being way too generous, but thank you very much. And we certainly watched. Look, we did something new on this film, and I've worked with the same crew for a long time. They are a family, and in many ways it is like a campaign. I think making a film is like trying to get somebody elected. You sacrifice everything in your life, you move out, you go on the road, you put up the tent, and you spend all of your intimate time with the same people, hopelessly going after this very singular cause, and you become very close to each other. And my crew is someone that they're my family. And what we did is at lunch, we had a little projector, and we would just project movies on the wall during lunch. We watched Altman. We watched a lot of movies, from the late 80s. I don't know how many times we watched The Candidate. Watched The War Room, the Clinton documentary. I mean, that was fascinating. The amount of details that we got out of that. Carville eating popcorn out of a coffee filter because they'd run out of bowls, things like that. Actually, there's a Michael Ritchie reference in the movie. It's small, but there's a moment, you're in an airport, it's the scene where they're discussing modern day news and how it's all about how they look now, and in the background you can see Hart trying to get a cell phone to operate. The shot begins with 3 guys on a payphone, and the first guy goes, "Hey, it's Mike Ritchie calling in from Texas." And then he stammers. You realize he screwed it up. Fuck! All right, and then we got Mike Ritchie operating, calling in from Texas, right? And then so that's our little nod to him.
I didn't catch that. Why don't we open up to the audience? I'm sure they have some very interesting questions. Yes, there's a gentleman right there. I don't know if that's a question for a political operative or a psychotherapist, but why don't you, somebody want to take that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because this is something that, Kevin, that you and I talked about when we were in prep, when we were in the midst of writing the film, is that during the '84 campaign, that when the campaign, there was a moment, the campaign was just in a few vans, and you guys would be sitting right next to each other, all crammed into these vans. You're spending all this intimate time with journalists and really getting to know each other. And then there was a moment in '87 when this happened, when all of a sudden it became a scandal, and things changed. And it became, you and other people, Sue described it this way too, as suddenly kind of being in the midst of a hurricane.
It was. I mean, I was in a hotel in New York when Hart was at the editors' convention, and my hotel room was staked out. So I went out to get the paper in the morning, and there were 5 reporters, right there. So, but I think the question you ask is really, for me, what the movie is about. This time that I've seen it, it's, what I want aggressive media, but what should they be aggressive about? Should they be pushing on policy? Is it personal stuff? The idea of staking out a candidate's house to see if he's having an affair with somebody. Consenting adults, I think you stay away from that story, but that's my opinion. But I think it's a good discussion for lots of people to have, and they've facilitated the discussion. What should reporters cover? And that's we don't answer that here. It's a long discussion, but we should be having vigorous discussions all the time about what's fair game.
And what's been interesting for us in showing the movie is the audience is always divided. Half the people in the audience say, the bedroom door is a wall, and people deserve a private life. And then the other half say, no, you want to run for president? I should be able to know anything. And what's been fascinating for us is to literally watch people in the audience where one person thinks they watched one film, and they go to the person next to them, and they realize the person sitting next to them feels as though they watched an entirely different film as far as who they think the heroes are, who they think the villains are, what is right. And there's something kind of nice about having the story as a prism for 2018, because it's very hard to talk today about modern politics. The conversation is so shrill. If you go on Twitter, you may get your head ripped off. And so the conversation today is like at 11. And when you talk about the heart story, you kind of dial it down to a 6, maybe.
So you're all going to have miserable arguments on the way home. You're welcome.
There's a woman right in the second row of the balcony. Yes.
Hi, I have a question. I remember going through when this happened. You ended the movie before Gary Hart decided to get back in briefly and let the people decide, and then get back out. And it seemed to me when he left, I remember telling my mom when the news broke, and she said, "Well, doesn't he have any friends?" And I said, "Yeah, he has a friend who put him on the boat." So that wasn't a helpful friend. But then people convinced him to get back in for a little while. So I just wonder why you chose to end the movie where you ended it, and whether or not, for you who lived it, what you thought of, Gary Hart, that brief part 2 when he briefly got back in.
Right. We were never interested in the idea of doing a biopic. And I suppose, I don't think any of us, either of us felt we were making a movie about Gary Hart. We were making a movie about a moment that happened very quickly. I think quicker than most people even remember it. The idea that his campaign lasted for 3 weeks and that this scandal happened in less than a week. He went from the front runner, he was 10 points ahead of Bush, but he was 25 points ahead of every Democrat. And within a week, he left politics, basically, forever. And it was that moment that we were interested in, particularly because it became this interesting test case. Here you have a candidate who was prescient about almost everything. I mean, this is a guy who in the 80s was saying, we're addicted to oil, and that addiction is going to take us into the Middle East, where we're going to encounter Islamic terrorism, and we will not know how to fight that because we have a military that only knows how to bomb people. And he was talking about a digital economy and all kinds of things in which he was way ahead of his time, and simultaneously was flawed and made human mistakes. And so I guess we were interested in that test case and how all the rest of us react. So it's not, while fascinating things continue to happen to him, and by the way, more fascinating things continue to happen to everyone who worked on that campaign. What we were interested in is how do we react in real time? If you go to the Washington Post, what is that conversation like? The men, the women, young, old, veterans versus newcomers. How do they have this conversation when they're trying to figure out whether or not they should go to press?
Additional questions? The gentleman right here.
In general and relative to how it reflected on.
I'll repeat that. What was the reaction of Gary and Lee Hart and Donna Risey, the film?
Do you want to talk about the campaign team? And I could talk about Gary and Donna.
I saw it with Gary's daughter and then a bunch of campaign comrades. And when the film ended, you could hear a pin drop. We were absolutely silent for a minute. And then Jason walked in. We were silent for another half minute. It started to get awkward.
One of the scariest moments of my life.
And then we just kind of exhaled. We went out and had some drinks, and we had a great dinner. And
Andrea was the one who broke the ice. Do you remember that?
No.
It was dead quiet, and then Andrea finally went.
That's right.
Well, that was terrific. And everyone started, and I just, oh, thank God, and started the conversation.
And I do think like the universal response that we had just as campaign staff was, in the same way that Matt Bai's book, I've told the Hart story 1,000 times over the last 20 years. And I read Matt Bai's book, and I was sad at the end of it, and it surprised me. And this movie, I was torn apart, and I was sad. And I thought I'd kind of left a lot of that behind. And so I thought that was a sign that it was good art. And I know that's what my colleagues on the campaign felt like.
Yeah, I remember. And also, some people, you may have brought this up, and a few others brought this up at the time. It was amazing. I was having drinks with them after, and it was a night I'll never forget. And they started talking about the weeks before it happened, and this trip you went through the South, which was kind of unheard of for a Democratic candidate to kind of explore the South the way you did and the way that people were lining up to meet him. And it felt like, it was described that night that it felt like you were with Kennedy. Gary and Lee watched the film the following morning After the screening was over, we immediately went for hot chocolates. And one of the first things that Gary said was, "Do I really speak like that?" And Lee said, "Yes, darling, that's exactly how you speak." Gary spoke for a while about the movie, and I don't want to speak for him. They both enjoyed the movie. It was difficult for both of them to watch, but they were blown away by Hugh's performance, and they were moved by the film, and they were grateful for the film. Donna was the first person that we showed the movie to. And I, it's a shame that Helen Estabrook, my producing partner, isn't here, because a big part of this conversation in the process of making this film was the burden that is put on the shoulders of women during a scandal, and how different that is than the burden that is put on the shoulders of men. And she, in many ways, was our kind of fourth writing partner in the way we talked about Lee Hart and the strength that she needed to exhibit in this role. It's a very kind of complicated moment. It's very easy to portray her moments as shrill or angry, and that's not who she was. She is, strong and thoughtful. The way we talk about Donna Rice, a woman who, when I would tell people I was making this movie, the first reaction would be, "Oh, right, Gary Hart. That boat, what was it called? Monkey Business? And that blonde, what was her name? Donna Rice." And they would say her name as though it was a joke. And that continues to this day, and it's kind of astonishing, even in this moment in which we've kind of re-examined Monica Lewinsky and other women that have been in the midst of a scandal. It's kind of fascinating how Donna's life was kind of stolen from her. And Matt, I think you were the first person to write about her and really kind of speak to how smart she was and how much she aspired to and how life-changing that moment was for her. So when we spoke, she was very grateful for the movie. She felt that the movie had empathy for her. And she thought that Sarah's performance had a lot of empathy and decency in it, and for that she was grateful. And then, interestingly, we just showed the film to Tom Fiedler. Tom Fiedler is the journalist from the Miami Herald. It was portrayed by Steve Zissis. I went up to Boston, and I showed the film, and the door opened, and he walked out, and he went, "Well, that was great." And we had a long talk about the movie and his kind of experience through that process. So the evenness in the response, I think, lets us know that we at least made the movie that we attempted to make.
There is so much to talk about, and unfortunately, they're telling me we don't have any more time. We have another show, but thank you to the director, the writers. Thank you as well. When does the film open, Jason?
Election day.
The film opens Election Day, and tell your friends and tell them to get out and vote.